In the Levantine Adventurer, the travels and missions of the Chevalier d'Arvaux, 1653 to 1697, written by Warren H. Lewis, we find a passage that explains to us the state of the immigration system in the 17th century. Specifically, quote, "In short, if a man wanted to do business in Cairo, he had to be prepared to put up uncomplainingly with any insult or violence." If that's not bad enough, when we look at a separate page, we find out the requirements similar to travel restrictions today. On June 21st, 1665, after an uneventful passage, d'Arvaux arrived at Marseille, where he was at once incarcerated in the quarantine hospital, and there he remained until the 26th, shut up in a little room without a window, in which was kept burning a fire of straw and strong-smelling herbs. With only 5 days quarantine, he was lucky, and I suspect the pursuer of having made a false declaration. For, coming from a plague port, the captain, after visiting the health office and there throwing his papers into a bowl of vinegar, should have returned on board to find his ship surrounded by guard boats and ready to be towed to the plague dock. There the cargo ought to have been discharged into special warehouses to be opened and aired, and d'Arvaux, instead of making a short visit to the infirmary, should have been locked up in the Lazare des Petits-Fiers. Not that the neglect of regulations mattered, for the whole process was merely a piece of officialdom. End quote. Next, we take a look at a different passage which explains the situation concerning Jews. Quote, "At Beirut, the Turks despised them so much that they would not accept them as converts unless they had first purified themselves by becoming Christians. But they were not confined in a ghetto and could hire houses anywhere, though not buy them." Now this situation puts into context the intent behind the Constitution of the United States, and specifically Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, which states that Congress shall have the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. Of course, the current immigration business is anything but uniform and leveraged by a particular company in the interests of certain clients, which according to CBS is the top visa sponsor, and apparently the removal of certain content that violates client standards is not conducive to business. So a certain company is throwing in the towel. Now, when we look at the current immigration business, certain elements mirror those of the 17th century, the very reason for the writing of the US Constitution. And when we look at the language of the State Department and various governmental agencies, we find various rhetorical acrobatics employed, with them attempting to say something that they're not comfortable in saying, mainly that certain requirements around the blood thing are both required but not required, but actually they're required. However, importantly, first, they say that the blood thing will be required after, specifically relating to a fiance, a foreign-born fiance. They say that the blood thing will not be required until attempting to transition status. However, they then say that certain individuals with obvious no conflict of interest are required to verify that said requirements that aren't requirements have already been met. Now, it's no surprise that such an entity would resort to veiled threats with the specific language of avoiding delays.